Hi there. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel, World of Stories. I have a lot of interesting life stories that I want to share with you. Enjoy listening.
Dad, come here. Look. Little Alice, wrapped in an old dusty blanket, called her father. She had found the blanket in the attic. She needed a tall stool to climb up there. The tall man entered the room and immediately grinned. Hello. The girl responded right away. She ran closer and began to theatrically twirl around, striking extravagant poses. Daddy, look. I'm a real countess. Alice draped the old blanket around herself like an evening gown, took a stick from a mop as if it were a staff, and waved it in the air. You're my patron, the girl continued to show off in front of her father. A smile spread across the perpetually stern man's face. That's right, dear. Absolutely right. He bent down to kiss his daughter. Now, my lady, off to the shower and then to bed. School tomorrow. The girl stopped, stomped her little foot, and yelled loudly. No. I will never go to school again. Her father was surprised. Why is that? Just because. She crossed her arms over her chest and turned away sharply. I won't go, that's it. He approached his daughter, squatted down, and looked into her eyes. Alice, dear. What happened? She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and dropped it onto the floor. Dust swirled around it. Go wash up. I'll tidy up here, the man said calmly. Alice left for school. She was dragging her backpack along, swinging it with force. Dark storm clouds had gathered in the sky over the small town where the girl lived. The wind picked up, tousling her light hair. Today's events couldn't leave her mind. The moment when her classmates used her backpack as if it were a sword in their games replayed in front of her eyes. The resentment was deeply embedded in the child's heart. She tried, but she couldn't stand up to her tormentors. Slowly, she reached the old local cemetery. Passing through the gate, she kicked a nearby stone with force. She screamed aloud in frustration, I hate it. Who, dear? A voice came from a distance. The girl hadn't seen its source yet, but she already knew whose voice it was. Alice's lips spread into a friendly smile. Vanessa. She ran up to the woman and threw herself into her arms. Burying her face in Vanessa's layers of clothing, the girl burst into bitter tears. What happened? Were they teasing you again? Vanessa sat down in front of Alice. She was a simple local janitor, uneducated but with a kind and compassionate heart. She had been working at the cemetery for several years. Vanessa felt sorry for little Alice. The girl was growing up without a mother, and her father, Mr. Carter, was a very stern, even somewhat rough man. Vanessa had known Alice since her childhood and tried to be both a mother and a friend to the girl, roles that Alice had never really had. Tell me, what happened? Vanessa asked cautiously. Wiping away her tears, Alice began to tell Vanessa about what had happened at school that day. Vanessa listened attentively, stroking Alice's head sympathetically. It's okay, dear. We'll figure something out. Alice wiped away her last tear with her sleeve and vigorously nodded her head. Oh, where's Dad? The girl finally asked. Mr. Carter, Alice's father, worked as a guard at this large cemetery. He was often not at home. That's why Alice spent most of her time right there, among old vaults and graves. Her father scolded her often, saying, Sweetheart, go to the playground, play there. There's no need for you to roam around these places. Alice would always shake her head in disagreement. She enjoyed spending time at the cemetery, especially since her favorite Vanessa was there. Vanessa told her. Your dad is over there. She extended her arm and pointed to a large, old building. It was something like a storage room, a big storage area with cemetery paraphernalia. Alice referred to this place as the little house. Your dad is busy there. It's better not to bother him, Vanessa said with concern. Darn it. The girl pouted her chubby pink lips. She had been looking forward to playing in that little house. Since she had spent a significant part of her childhood at the cemetery, wreaths, coffins, and similar things didn't scare Alice at all. "I thought we would play there together," Alice said with a touch of disappointment. Vanessa smiled. "We'll definitely play when your dad finishes work. Did you come straight here from school? Haven't you been home?" Before Alice could reply, familiar, painfully cutting voices echoed from behind. "What did you come here for?" A group of children had gathered by the cemetery gates. Alice's classmates simultaneously turned to look at her. "Hey! Did you come here to steal candy from the dead?"
Ha! Ha!
Beggar. "Actually, kids. Alice's dad is in charge here," Vanessa intervened in the children's conversation. "And since her dad is in charge, that means Alice is too," she said in a businesslike tone, trying to reason with the mean-spirited kids. The children fell silent. They began to exchange glances and whispered to each other. The tall boy, Alice's main tormentor, took a step forward. He looked directly into Alice's eyes and said something she definitely didn't expect to hear. "Cool. You're lucky. Can we come in? We want to hang out in the cemetery too." Alice could only blink her eyes. Fortunately, her protector Vanessa was right there. "You can't. If Alice wants, she'll invite you." But for now, Vanessa approached and lowered her voice to a menacing whisper. "Get out of here," she suddenly shouted. Alice's classmates jerked back as if shocked and quickly ran away. Vanessa smirked triumphantly. "Look at that. They're jealous of you. How about inviting them to play together? Your birthday is coming up soon. Let's throw a party right here. I'm sure your dad will allow it. Maybe you'll make friends with them." Alice snorted. "No way. This is my place. Do they really think they can make fun of me on my own birthday?" She pouted indignantly. "What if we teach them a lesson?" Vanessa took Alice by the hand and led her to her storage room. "What do you think of this?" "That's an idea." Alice grinned mischievously. "Did you see how scared they were? Idiots." She laughed spiritedly. She looked at Vanessa from the bottom up, but her gaze was just like that of a royal princess, demanding, important. "Let's scare them. But don't tell Dad." Vanessa laughed in response. "All right, dear. Let's go. You need to eat lunch and do your homework. I don't have any work now, so I'll help you, and then we'll come up with a plan together. Let's go." Alice exclaimed happily. The day of the girl's birthday arrived. She had persuaded her father for a long time to allow her to have a party right there, practically at his workplace. He had initially refused the idea, but when Vanessa convinced him, saying she would supervise everything, he agreed. Alice woke up early in the morning. Her father was already sitting next to her on the bed, proudly handing her a gift. The stern, gloomy cemetery guard seemed to everyone else as a malevolent, rough, unsociable person. However, only when he was with his daughter did the somber man light up and become a joyful and kind father. He took his daughter to an amusement park and then escorted her back to the cemetery. The girl persistently asked her father to leave quickly before the guests arrived. She told him that she and Vanessa had already prepared everything and that her classmates might laugh at her if her father was around. They might say she was still just a child. The man, who had wished for his daughter to find friends, reluctantly agreed. Leaving Vanessa in charge, he kissed Alice goodbye and left the cemetery under his daughter's watchful gaze. The girl happily ran to her little house. Vanessa. Vanessa. They'll be here soon." The girl, who was preparing the room for the celebration, turned around. "Happy birthday, princess. This is for you." She handed Alice a gift, a large and beautiful doll. Alice blossomed with joy. "Thank you. You're the best. Is everything ready?" "Ready." Vanessa winked at the birthday girl. A little earlier, Alice and Vanessa had come up with a clever plan to teach her tormentors a lesson and get revenge for all the teasing. Alice glanced at her watch. Alice, look at the time. Run, greet the guests. And you? The girl asked with a barely perceptible craftiness in her voice. I'll get ready for good. Vanessa winked again and mysteriously disappeared into a nearby small room. Alice ran towards the gate. As she got closer, she noticed that her classmates had already arrived and were hesitating uncertainly near the entrance. Wearing an air of importance and arrogance, the girl addressed the group of friends. You can come in. Justin, one of Alice's classmates, stepped forward. What a beautiful dress you have on. The boy was one of the few who didn't mock poor Alice. He tried to protect the girl in every way he could, but it was all in vain. For such chivalry, he often got scolded alongside her. Alice responded indifferently.
Yeah.
Thanks. She put on the dress her father had given her as a birthday present in the morning. The family lived modestly, but Mr. Carter tried to provide his daughter with everything she needed. Justin and Alice walked ahead of the others. Justin continued the conversation. So, what are we going to do? Alice just snorted in response. You'll see. Justin often tried to talk to her, to strike up a conversation, but the little girl only brushed him off. She felt like he was just like everyone else, making fun of her. Finally, Alice led the children to the technical cemetery building. Her classmates eyed the place with distrust. Dressed elegantly, Deborah timidly asked. What's this place? I'm not going in there. Alice smirked. Well, you don't have to. Stand here alone if you're such a scaredy cat. Someone among the nearby classmates sneezed. Alice continued. Is anyone else scared? Why did you come then? I could have invited other friends. Of course, Alice was fibbing. After all, she didn't have any other friends. But she knew well that this party was a chance to show the others what she was worth. She provocatively asked the kids. Well, what? Who else won't go? The crowd of kids, taken by the provocation, collectively shouted. I'll go. I'm not afraid. The children's voices blended together, but the harmonious performance didn't sound very convincing. The gloomy, low-hanging sky and the overall atmosphere of the cemetery still frightened them. Then let's go. Alice confidently lifted her chin and entered the little house. The children followed her and stood frozen. Among the graves, colorful balloons bobbed, shiny tinsel adorned the wreaths. The festive decorations clashed so much with the nearby graves that the combination was more unsettling than the children could admit. They held their breath. Alice, feeling like she was in her element, began to speak ironically. You guys aren't as tough here as you are at school, huh? You wanted to be here. So, why are you so quiet now? The children remained cautiously silent. Only Justin timidly spoke up. It's so eerie. Kind of cool though. A cool party. The other children nervously shifted in place, looking around. While their attention was occupied, Alice quietly approached the light switch. She waited until the children started to recover, relax, and engage in whispers and jokes with each other. She waited and then abruptly turned off the lights. The children screamed, and Alice swiftly locked the door from the inside. Shut up if you don't want to wake him. In the dim light, it was evident that the girl was pointing her finger at a closed coffin. The teenagers fell silent immediately. Oh, he knows how you treated me at school. I told him everything. One of the kids asked in a trembling voice. Who is he? Alice, forgive us. We won't do it again. Alice stayed silent for effect. Her performance with Vanessa was coming to an end. She returned to the door and opened it again. She knew that in a minute, her classmates would rush out of the house, and then the cemetery altogether. She raised her hand, pointed again at the closed coffin, and shouted loudly,
Ah.
That's who. In that very second, the coffin burst open with a crash from the inside, and a made-up Vanessa crawled out. Her face was covered in green paint, black lines mimicked wrinkles, and red lips imitated blood running down them. She briskly emerged from the coffin, her arms stretched out like a movie zombie, and roared in a voice not her own, slowly advancing toward the huddled children.
Ah.
Alice's classmates dashed out of the house, shrieking. They rushed away from the cemetery. Delighted, Alice followed them and triumphantly yelled, "Now you know who's watching over you. Touch me even once more, and he'll find you, come at night, and drink every drop of your miserable blood." Howling in fear, her classmates disappeared into the distance. Alice, overcome with joy, jumped in place. She ran back into the little house, turned on the lights, and dashed into Vanessa's zombie-like embrace. "Thank you. Thank you." The girl was genuinely happy. "You portrayed the dead so awesomely, and the makeup was fantastic." "I almost believed it myself," Alice laughed cheerfully. "How about them? You totally nailed it." Justin stepped forward from the dark corner of the room. Alice, lost in her elation, didn't notice that not all her classmates had fled. As it turned out, Justin had stayed behind. "Why weren't you scared?" "Huh? Why didn't you run away?" Alice pointed at Justin, surprised. "Oh, I'm not scared. I know that there's no such thing as zombies." The boy confidently approached Alice. "My dad told me it's all just stories, and I figured you were getting back at them." "How?" the girl asked. "I guessed." Justin grinned triumphantly. "Can I give my gift now?" "Of course." Vanessa chimed in. "Give your gift, and while you do that, I'll wash off the makeup. Then we'll have some cake." Vanessa tousled Alice's fair head and left the room. "This is for you." Justin pulled a small box out of his pocket. He opened it and handed it to Alice. "What is this?" The girl blinked in surprise, took the gift, and started examining it. It turned out to be a beautiful pendant in the shape of a small golden skull. She admired the ornament and the boy looked embarrassed. "Well, you like all those spooky things. So, I thought." For the first time, Alice looked at Justin differently. Maybe he didn't hate her like all the other kids did? After thoroughly inspecting the lovely pendant, the girl softly said, wiping away tears that welled up, "Thank you, Justin." The boy replied bashfully, "You're welcome." "Alice, you're so beautiful." Vanessa, who had removed her makeup, returned to the kids. In her hands was a large cake adorned with burning candles. She cheerfully sang as she placed it right on the coffin, "Happy birthday to you." Alice blew out all the candles at once and laughed out loud. Vanessa took the cake and led the children to the guard's house, where a beautifully set table awaited. As they began to cut the cake, Vanessa approvingly remarked, "What a brave and bold friend you have in Alice." Alice held her breath. "Friend?" To her. She nervously glanced at her classmate.
Yeah.
"And I have such a cool friend too," Justin proudly replied, stuffing a huge piece of cake into his mouth. Amazed, Alice could hardly believe what was happening. Finally, she had a real friend. Time passed by. New springs replaced long winters, joyful summer vacations came and went, and Alice, like all the other children, gradually grew up. The classmates who were terrified that distant day never bullied Alice again and even collectively apologized to her. Justin introduced her to his sister, Dolores, who was a year older and attended a different school with an artistic focus. Deborah, Justin and Alice's classmate, also started hanging out with them. At school, they always stuck together as a trio, and after lessons, Dolores would join them. That's how Alice acquired a whole group of friends. As Alice grew older, she noticed a pattern. It seemed that Justin liked her, but in turn, Justin seemed to have a crush on Deborah. However, Alice tried not to dwell on it too much. She was just happy to have real friends. One hot summer day, the kids, as always, played at the cemetery. Over time, even the fearful Deborah stopped being scared of the eerie place. They often wandered around the graves and played. On this day, they cautiously entered a vast and majestic ancient tomb they had discovered the day before at the far end of the cemetery. It was where recent landslides had exposed ancient burials once buried beneath construction debris. They didn't know who had done this or why, but the sight of these old structures, so beautiful with their Gothic arched facades, a cracked marble angel perched atop, enthralled them. Deborah whistled, "Wow, this is something. Someone rich and famous is definitely buried here. It's amazing. Maybe the mayor's family?" Dolores speculated. "No." Alice, with an air of confidence, stepped forward. "It's the tomb of some ancient noble lineage, aristocrats, or something like that. Really wealthy people, from back when kings ruled. My dad told me. Imagine how much money they had." Justin exclaimed. The kids walked along, captivated by the space. The massive tombstones, crafted from some smooth, unfamiliar stone, did look very old and incredibly expensive. "Alice, look. You look just like her." Deborah called Alice over to one of the tombstones, next to which stood a small statue. The sculpture depicted a woman who stood regally, resembling a queen, in the midst of the tomb. Due to its age, the statue was already covered in cracks, and even the name of its owner, written in an old, hard-to-read script, was almost impossible to make out. Squinting, Alice tried to decipher the name. Countess, Agnia, Anastasia. Darn, can't see it. Maybe Countess Alice? Deborah playfully suggested. "Oh, come on. That's not funny," Alice dismissed her friend. "I'll read it now," Justin declared, stepping up beside the girls. He started scrutinizing the inscription, but alas, couldn't decipher it either. While he was trying to make out the partially erased characters, a piece of stone suddenly gave way, collapsing under Justin's weight. The children instantly jumped back from the statue. "Justin, darn it. My dad will kill us," Alice covered her mouth in fear. Deborah panicked. "And what if this tomb belongs to some, I don't know, mafia people? They'll kill all of us." "Quiet." Dolores interrupted the panic, having been silent until now. "Do you see that?" She pointed to the piece that had fallen from the tomb. "What's that?" Alice began to peer closely, approached closer, and indeed, inside the statue, there was something hidden. A piece of some light metal peeked out from within the stone. The fallen piece had clearly revealed an ancient secret to the world. The friends exchanged glances. "Treasure?" they exclaimed in unison. Alice tried to extract the find from the stone. All in vain. Justin approached, pulled, but couldn't get it out either. Then, without communicating, they began to clean the treasure they had found from the debris that concealed it. They figured out how to extract their find without damaging the statue too much. When they were done and had successfully freed the treasure from the stone's grip, a rather large and heavy chest stood before them. The chest looked antique and weathered. Gilded inlays adorned its corners, and the heavy, time-worn chain, with a matching lock, seemed almost menacing. "What is this?" Alice whispered, gazing mesmerized at the discovery. "It's a treasure. The riches of that wealthy family," Justin spoke up. "Shall we open it?" Deborah stepped closer and reached her hand toward the chest. "No. This isn't ours." Justin stopped his friend. "Besides, we can't open it ourselves. Can't you see the lock?" Alice wasn't paying much attention to the children's conversation. Her imagination was running wild, painting images of ancient castles, elegant princesses, velvet curtains, sophisticated furniture, and obedient servants in her mind. Alice had always loved palaces and kingdoms. She enjoyed studying how noble families lived in different countries. Her ephemeral fantasies were interrupted by her father's unexpectedly gloomy voice from afar. "So, what's going on here?" He entered the tomb and, as if by magic, stood right behind them. The friends exchanged glances. Justin took a step forward, making it clear to the man that he was responsible for this incident. "Mr. Carter, it's my fault. I leaned on this stone carelessly, and it came loose. The girls aren't to blame." Mr. Carter smiled slightly. "All right. Why didn't you call me right away? This place can be very dangerous." The room is full of cracks. What do you have there? He moved forward and began to examine the treasure the kids had found with surprise. Justin continued, feeling nervous. We got it out ourselves. It's some ancient treasure. We were just about to come to you. Really? We just didn't have time. It was my idea to get the treasure out from under the statue's base. The girls aren't at fault, the teenager clarified again. I understand, Justin. All right. With some effort, the man picked up the chest. As they left the tomb, he motioned for the kids to follow him. They obediently walked behind him and thus made their way to the guards' quarters. After seating them at a large table and setting a kettle to boil, the man ensured that each of them had a hot drink and some treats before starting his story. Long ago, in these lands, lived an ancient and noble family. They had royal blood, were very famous, and had a lot of influence. But for certain reasons, they had to move very far away. The man sighed heavily and looked off into the distance through the walls. We know that during the revolution, aristocrats were expelled from the country, Justin said with a hint of aggression. There's no need to talk down to us like we're kids. They were all exploiters and bourgeoisie. Mr. Carter turned his head and looked intently into the boy's eyes. I suppose they've hammered that into your head at school. Well, then. If you prefer, you can think that way. But the remains of the family you've discovered today were nothing like that. They cared for each other and for all the common people who worked for them. In the early 19th century, the head of the family granted freedom to all his serfs, but they didn't leave. Because this was their ancestral home, and they were content here. Puzzled, Justin fell silent, then asked, why did they move away? The story told by his father enthralled Alice. How should I know? What was their surname? Where did they move to? What was her name? The girl continued firing off questions. Alice. Her father interrupted her. I've told you what could be learned. I don't know any more than that. The girl fell into thought. For a moment, she thought her father was hiding something from her, but that thought was quickly replaced by others. Succumbing to her imagination, she once again plunged into a world of dreams. They reached the little house with various cemetery props, where Mr. Carter stored the found treasure deep inside. Then, he walked each of the children home. A couple of days later, Alice tried to find that very chest, but all in vain. She asked Vanessa, but she only shrugged in response. I didn't see any treasure, she replied. As time passed, both Alice and her friends forgot about the found treasure, immersing themselves in their childhood concerns, games, and other interesting children's activities. Alice's little life continued its measured pace. After she stopped being bullied at school, she was even ready to admit that her life was going excellently. Loving parents, good friends, and excellent academic performance in school. What else was needed for happiness? However, the peaceful life didn't last long. At the age of 14, when the small, awkward girl began to awaken into a mature and graceful young woman, Alice fell seriously ill. She realized she wasn't entirely healthy while at school. The girl had felt some unpleasant burning sensation in her chest before, but she hadn't attached much importance to it. Everyone experiences some pain sooner or later. That's what the girl thought to herself and, not wanting to worry her father unnecessarily, she didn't tell him about her occasional pains. However, Alice herself didn't fully understand what exactly was ailing her. On that day at school, on an entirely ordinary and dragging weekday, the girl once again felt that same burning sensation in her chest. She tried not to dwell on the discomfort. To shake it off like one would shake off annoying flies, but her friend Justin realized that something was bothering her and promptly led her straight to the school nurse. After the nurse carefully examined the girl, she instantly called her father, and then everything became foggy. Endless tests, hospital stays, examinations, and intravenous treatments followed. The girl was just flowing along with the current of her life. She never managed to understand what illness had overcome her. She didn't understand why the illness literally forced her into the hospital. Why the illness made her stop going to school. Why the illness took away her friends. She, like a small creature, gnawed out her place in this life, her place in school. Although Alice was a girl who went unnoticed and was quiet, somewhat peculiar, many at school considered her eccentric, but it was her own space. She had struggled so hard for it. The girl didn't understand how the illness had managed to quietly and suddenly turn everything upside down. Eventually, the joyful and seemingly unattainable teenage life passed her by. Alice grew up, spending her teenage years in hospitals and homeschooling. From a little girl, she transformed into a young woman as expected, and a very beautiful one at that. The illness gave in and retreated, and the almost adult Alice enrolled in college in the history department. Money wasn't abundant in the family to begin with, and after the illness, both her father and she became quite poor. When Alice began to feel better, she insisted that her father allow her to work. She insisted on contributing to their small family's income. There weren't many options for earning money, and she had to find a way to balance work and study. Eventually, the girl got a job as a part-time waitress in a small cafe. One early Sunday morning, the girl saw a familiar face among the cafe's patrons. "Alice, is that you?" The cafe visitor took off her sunglasses, carefully placed them on the table, and pushed her long chestnut curls back. Alice squinted. "Deborah?" She stared at the visitor in surprise. The waitress's notepad nearly slipped from her hand.
Yeah,
What a meeting. "Well, how are you? How's your health?" Deborah asked delicately. When Alice stopped showing up at school, the kids weren't very surprised. After all, everyone gets sick, what's so terrible about that? However, when they found out that Alice's father had taken her documents out of school altogether, they were quite upset. They pestered their teacher for a long time, trying to get her to tell them where Alice had gone. Eventually, the homeroom teacher gave in and told the friends about the girl's illness. While Justin and Dolores still tried to somehow maintain contact with Alice, attempting to see her through her father, Deborah completely turned away from her. She was repulsed. What if the illness was contagious? Little Deborah had been wrinkling her nose in displeasure ever since. When Justin mentioned Alice, she would make a face. Over time, nobody was really allowed near the sick friend, and soon the friends gave up their futile attempts to see her. "I'm doing well, thank you." "And how about you?" Alice asked. "I'm good." Deborah beamed with a smile. "Listen, don't get upset, but I'm really hungry. Will you take my order?" "Oh, yes, of course." Alice was taken aback, bustling and almost dropping her notepad as she scolded herself for her lack of composure. She started taking the former friend's order. When the girl finished serving the customer, Deborah spoke up. "Alice, don't take offense, but you're so pretty, yet you look like a pauper. You could use some dressing up." A blush spread across the young waitress's face. She had already forgotten about past grievances, and now she felt like that same little girl whose classmates used to play football with her backpack. Deborah continued. "What's wrong with you? I was giving you a compliment." She stood up, casually placed a few banknotes on the table. "Listen, maybe we could meet up sometime to chat? It's been years since we saw each other, right? What do you say?" Alice reluctantly agreed. She tried not to take offense at Deborah, that's just how she was. They met a few days later at another cafe. Deborah, who arrived earlier, waved to Alice from a table. "Over here." Alice sat down carefully. Breaking the awkward silence, she began to ask her former friend questions. "So, how are you? What's new with you?" the girl inquired. Deborah smiled and launched into her story. She talked a lot, non-stop. It seemed as though Deborah was reporting on every single day she'd lived without Alice. Alice found out that Deborah had enrolled in a good college to study journalism. She learned how challenging it had been for Deborah to pass her exams. She even heard about those strange moles that Deborah had been examined for in hospitals some time ago. Eventually, Alice learned that Deborah was getting married. Deborah spoke quickly, and to Alice, her voice seemed to turn into an indistinct hum. "Alice, come to my wedding. It'll be fun. Really fun. Lots of our classmates will be there. You haven't seen them in ages. So, it's a great reason to come. Deborah fell silent and stared at Alice expectantly. Will you come? Alice smiled and calmly said. Of course, I'll come. Who's the groom? She asked more out of politeness than curiosity. Deborah chuckled. Well, come and meet him then. Just dress up a bit better. Okay? Well, that's it, I've got to run. She gave her friend a quick peck on the cheek, slipped some money into Alice's hand. Settle the bill for me, I'm in a hurry. I'll give you all the details later. I'll call you. She got up and fluttered out of the room like a bright butterfly. Alice snorted, she didn't even ask about me. She pulled out her wallet, sorrowfully pulled out a few more bills. She counted out a tip for the waiter and carefully slipped them into the checkbook. After all, she understood perfectly well how difficult and ungrateful this job could be. Money was earned with such backbreaking effort, yet spent in an instant. Lost in thought, she walked home. Deborah's words about dressing nicely for the wedding lingered in her mind. Money was still ridiculously scarce, and of course, Alice didn't own any good, expensive, and beautiful clothes. She dressed plainly and modestly. Some of the clothes she wore were even hand-me-downs from her father's old friends. Alice returned from the meeting in a terrible mood. She quickly took off her shoes, flopped down on the bed face down. Her father slowly approached her. Sweetie, what's wrong? He gently sat on the edge of the bed. His graying eyebrows rose in surprise, and his already wrinkled forehead resembled the skin of a Shar-Pei dog. It's been so long since I've seen you like this. Since your childhood, even. Daddy, everything's fine. She turned her face to him, raised her hand, and gently stroked his cheek. Sometimes she marveled and saddened at how much her father had aged. Alice, I can see it all. What's going on? Oh, darn it, Deborah. Remember Deborah? I met her the other day. She invited me to her wedding, and here I am. What should I wear? The girl turned towards the wall. You're still stuck in the past, my daughter? But I've already told you. Yes. Clothes aren't the most important thing. Beauty comes from within and all that. Alice quickly cut off her father's lecture. Dad, I understand all that perfectly well. And to be honest, I don't care about the clothes. I just haven't seen my classmates in so long. I'd like to, well, I don't know, impress them somehow. Do some nice makeup, a hairstyle, pick a good outfit. And my salary will barely cover a second-hand trouser suit from a thrift store, and even that's men's. The girl's father chuckled good-naturedly and, smiling, asked. So, when is this wedding? I don't know yet. Deborah will call and let me know. I see. His tone changed. From a friendly father, he turned into a stern and somber man again. Alice, go out, relax, distract yourself with something. After all, you still have time, and I'll figure out your problem somehow. The girl responded with a sarcastic chuckle.
Yeah.
How will you solve it, Daddy? The elderly man grinned cunningly and headed for the door. The girl called after him. Dad. She frowned and paused for a moment, but still asked, What do you mean? This phrase of yours, while there's still time. What do you mean, while I'm young and all that? Exactly, my dear. He cryptically answered, smiled, and left the room. The next evening, Deborah called. She gave her old friend the address of the restaurant where the wedding banquet was scheduled, along with the date and time. Alice pondered. Why didn't Deborah invite me to the ceremony? Alice was hurt by this fact, but after a while, she comforted herself with the thought that probably only close family and friends of the newlyweds would be present at the actual ceremony. After hanging up the phone, Alice went to her father. He sat in an old, worn-out armchair, his legs covered by a dark green woolen blanket, and he held a book carefully in his hands. Alice shared the news with her father. Dad, Deborah called just now. The wedding is in 3 days. Oh, I need to think about what I'll wear. If I don't have a proper outfit, I won't go at all. I don't want to embarrass myself. Alice, come over here, my dear, Mr. Carter calmly beckoned to his daughter. Yes, she nervously approached him, sat down in front of him on her haunches, and took his hand. Daddy, is everything all right? Yes, yes. Everything's fine. Before I give you the money, do you promise to spend it all on yourself? Manicure, hairstyle, whatever you girls like. The girl was touched by how lost her father was in today's prices. Well, how much could he give her? Hopefully, it would be enough for a simple dress from a mass market store. Alice smiled with all her might. Regardless of the amount, she was incredibly grateful for her father's support. She nodded vigorously and said firmly, I promise. Well then. All right. Here you go. From somewhere, the elderly man pulled out a thick envelope. Alice glanced at her father in surprise, took the envelope in her hands, felt it, then opened it and gasped in astonishment. The envelope was practically bursting with a large number of bills. Dad, where is this from? She quickly took out the money, counted it. There's enough here for 10 of my salaries. Are these real bills? Really? Is this some sort of prank? Oh, I won't go anywhere. I understand everything. To hell with all of this. Watch your language, the man scolded. You should behave decently. Remember that. And the money is real. Trust me. You gave me your word to go fulfill your promises. Don't ask where the money comes from. I won't tell you anyway. He threw off the blanket and slowly got up from the chair. You'll find out soon enough, but for now, go and enjoy yourself. Where is this from, Dad? The girl, ignoring her father's orders, repeated her question. I withdrew some savings from my bank account. Alice, just go already, Mr. Carter repeated, but something in his tone made the girl doubt the truthfulness of his words. However, noticing the stern notes in his voice, Alice decided not to press him further. After all, Alice was young and, like all young people, eager for life's amusements. She kissed her father.
Goodbye.
Repeating a few times. Thank you, Daddy. And grabbing her bag, she rushed out of the house. Never before in her life had Alice held such a large sum of money. On the day of her friend's wedding, Alice was in high spirits. She skillfully turned before the mirror. The pixie cut looked stunning on her light hair. It accentuated the graceful, noble features of her face. The skillfully applied professional makeup emphasized the beauty of her bright blue eyes, and the chosen dress perfectly completed the entire look. The girl was wearing a long, narrow dark blue evening dress from a well-known brand with an open back and silver trimming along the edge. She looked at herself from head to toe once more. The thought crossed her mind, I look like some sort of royal figure. Smiling at her reflection in the mirror, Alice called a taxi and headed straight for the designated restaurant. Approaching the venue, she suddenly remembered all the dreadful and hurtful moments from her school past, and her heart pounded like an injured bird with alarming force. As she got out of the taxi, she stopped in front of the main entrance. She took a deep breath, tried to suppress the unexpected trembling in her hands with her neat manicure, glistening in the bright light, a royal blue color. There is such a beautiful color that echoes the shade of velvet worn by monarchs. The girl let out a deep exhale and entered. She hadn't even made it inside when a young man immediately approached her, smiling warmly. The guy motioned for a waiter and ordered 2 glasses of champagne. He quickly struck up a conversation. Allow me to treat you. You're so beautiful. Are you on the groom's or bride's side? I don't recognize you, he seemed a bit embarrassed. Our town is small, and everyone knows each other. You're not from around here, right? Alice scrutinized the face of the man who approached her. Calming her nerves, she asked calmly, Casper? The guy was surprised. Yes, and have we met? We have, the girl said. She waved her hand dismissively, declining the champagne and without saying a word, moved forward. In school, Casper was the leader of a gang of bullies. All the bullying that Alice endured was carried out under his direct leadership. In the upper grades, he heartlessly tormented the younger students and deliberately targeted the weakest ones. Those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Casper caught up with the girl and looked at her with more awareness, asking in astonishment, "Alice? Is that really you?" "It's me," the girl replied expressionlessly. She continued her way through the banquet hall, looking for Deborah. Casper remained behind, watching Alice with fascination. Not finding her friend, the girl sat down at an empty table, took a glass of champagne, glancing at the surroundings. All the faces were familiar to her. She caught the surprised glances directed at her. Some recognized her but hesitated to approach. Some had already learned the identity of the mysterious stranger from Casper, and a few came up to her, showering her with compliments, their surprise unconcealed. Alice smiled triumphantly. The expected effect had been achieved. She clearly understood that she had drawn all the attention in the room to herself. She sipped champagne with boredom, occasionally nibbling on small canapés. The bride and groom were nowhere to be seen. So, the girl decided to go outside for some fresh air in the restaurant's courtyard. She walked through the door that a man kindly held open for her, and a little later, she recognized him as a former acquaintance. They exchanged a few sentences with one of her classmates, who persistently asked for the contacts of Alice's hairdresser. She politely brushed off other school acquaintances who asked for her phone number. Finally, she found a secluded bench and sat down on the edge with pleasure. Mentally, the girl admitted to herself that she was tired of so much attention. She surveyed the courtyard. There were plenty of trees and bushes adorned with colorful garlands, and somewhere nearby, a fountain was bubbling. She closed her eyes, immersing herself in her thoughts. Without noticing, someone sat down next to her on the bench. "A tough day?" a male voice sounded. Alice opened her eyes and looked closely at the man who had joined her. He continued without waiting for an answer. "In my case, it certainly was. Oh, how tired I am." The man stretched his legs forward and leaned back on the bench, casually resting his hands behind his head. "And are you Deborah's friend? Your face is so familiar, but I can't quite remember who you are." Alice furrowed her brows in concern and asked softly, "Justin?" Her heart pounded with renewed force. She didn't quite understand why exactly. Justin blinked in surprise, sat up a bit, and stared into her eyes. "Alice." Giving in to some unknown impulse, the guy pulled his former friend closer, hugging her tightly and whispered softly, "How glad I am that you're okay. How glad I am to finally see you." Then he pulled back slightly and continued, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I don't even know what came over me." "It's okay," Alice said. "I'm glad to see you too." In the girl's heart, an unfamiliar feeling awakened. Sitting next to her old friend, Alice suddenly realized that she liked him. The girl blushed at her own thoughts. "Have you been here long?" "I haven't seen Deborah. She promised to introduce me to her fiancé, but she's disappeared somewhere." "Oh, me." He stumbled over his words, "I mean, me." He looked at the girl again and then pulled her closer, passionately and greedily kissing her. Alice froze against the bench, and at the same time, a genuine fire blazed within her. This turn of events stirred up a storm of emotions inside her, but she couldn't find the strength to break the kiss. She wilted under his unexpected intensity, yielding to her feelings. When he finally released her, he apologized once again. "I'm sorry for that. Just, Alice. I've always loved you, you know." The girl didn't know what to say. She just continued to sit immobile next to him, shyly averting her gaze from Justin's intense stare. In the distance, a voice could be heard, and the young people turned simultaneously. "And here you are, already sitting together? Oh my." Deborah was confidently moving in their direction. Her transparent veil fluttered in the wind, and the hem of her snowy voluminous dress was held in her hand. "Ollie, did you get acquainted with my husband now?" the bride asked cheerfully. Alice jumped up from the bench as if scalded and looked at Justin indignantly. He guiltily lowered his gaze. Deborah approached closer and demonstratively kissed her husband on the bench, then turned triumphantly to her former friend. In her gaze, one could read something like, "Now you understand who won." Finally, Deborah interrupted the lingering, torturous pause. "Alice, listen. You look stunning. I didn't expect this from you. Did you rob a store? You go, girl." Deborah laughed, paying no attention to the mood of her newlywed husband or her old friend. Alice coughed slightly, preparing to respond to this girl and her lustful wretch of a husband. Now she was grown up, now she could stand up for herself, but all she could manage was to give them both a contemptuous look and walk away demonstratively. Unexpectedly, her father's words came to mind. "You should behave decently." She realized that quarreling with Deborah wouldn't achieve anything. In confusion, she left the restaurant, ignoring all the acquaintances who wanted to talk to her. Despite the mismatch between her glamorous attire and public transportation, she sat right on the bus and headed home. The twilight had already descended on the city streets. As Alice entered their small house on the cemetery grounds, she was still thinking about what had happened at the wedding. Why did he kiss me? He just got married. What a jerk, the young girl thought, feeling very angry at Justin, but then she remembered that kiss, which had burned her like fire. Completely entangled in her own thoughts and feelings, Alice walked into the room. The sight that met her plunged her into a new shock. In the middle of the room, right on a large old suitcase, sat her father dressed as if for a long journey. "Dad!" the girl exclaimed in surprise. "Where are you going?" "Not you, but we." Her father's voice sounded oddly, almost ceremoniously. "We have to leave. I've gathered all the necessary things, we'll buy the rest there. That's it. It's time." "What? Where? What's happening?" the girl almost shouted in confusion. "Tell me what's going on here." Her father looked reproachfully at his daughter, then stood up, opened the front door, and gestured for her to leave. Without understanding anything, Alice obediently left the apartment, and they headed to the airport. Alice, as if she had returned to her childhood, no longer understood what was happening. She barely had time to change clothes and stuff her stunning dress into the suitcase. She and her father got into a taxi, reached the airport, and embarked on a complex and long journey. To her, it felt like they had already arrived at their destination, but it turned out to be just a layover. The complicated, long, and completely incomprehensible journey completely threw Alice off balance. Especially since her father hadn't bothered to tell her where exactly they were going. At some point, she stopped trying to understand what was happening and simply followed her father meekly. Opening her eyes, Alice struggled to realize where she was, and a minute later, she understood that the plane was rapidly descending. She turned her head and looked at her father with hope. He nodded in understanding. "We've arrived," he told her. The pilot's voice announced in English, Chinese, and some other language that the plane was landing at Geneva International Airport. The small family endured the passport control line, received their small luggage, and finally left the airport. Exhausted to death, Alice lazily looked around. Once upon a time, she would have done anything just to catch a glimpse of Switzerland. To stroll through the streets of Geneva, but now she was too worn out, barely dragging herself along behind her father. Suddenly, the man abruptly stopped, looked around carefully, and pointed to a long, luxurious black limousine with his hand. "Alice. They've come after us, get in," the man said calmly. The girl wanted to be surprised, but she didn't even have the strength for that anymore. She approached the limousine, waited for the courteous young man to open the door for them, and got into the back seat. Mr. Carter followed her, and the car smoothly pulled away. The girl tried once again to ask her father about what was happening, but it was in vain. He refused to talk. Over and over, he reminded Alice that she would soon find out everything on her own. The limousine also came to a gentle stop, and the girl stepped out onto the street, her eyes wide open. Before her stretched a huge park with a majestic house in the middle, more resembling a medieval castle, and some elegant buildings nearby. From her vantage point, she could see the edge of a magnificent garden, and in the distance, she managed to spot a low building that resembled a stable. Alice was surprised to realize that she wasn't just facing a luxurious country house, but an entire estate. Majestic, beautiful, and so significant. She looked at her father once again. He said somewhat alienatedly, "They're escorting you to your quarters now. Don't be afraid of anything or anyone. I'll be nearby." At that moment, another young man in a black and white suit appeared before them. He looked awfully similar to those trained servants described in books about aristocratic life. The young man gallantly bowed and led the girl into the building. She turned around, but her father stayed behind. He awkwardly waved his hand, and for a moment, Alice thought she saw tears glistening in his eyes. The girl almost gasped out loud as she entered the house. In the middle of the giant hall stood an elegant and very wide staircase. The whole interior seemed to be taken from the past. It was as if it had woven itself from the girl's childhood fantasies, the ones where she imagined herself a princess or even a queen. Alice was led to her room. The young man bowed and said in somewhat broken English, "Make yourself comfortable, madam. They will come for you later." With these words, he withdrew. Dazed, the girl slowly walked into the room. A large, wide bed stood in the middle, hiding silk pillows and a luxurious blanket under a thin canopy. Next to the bed was an elegant couch with red velvet upholstery. To herself, the girl noted, "Yes, this room is larger than our entire apartment." She looked around, carefully running her hand along the luxurious wooden wall paneling. Alice walked further and discovered a bathroom, and near the bed, she noticed a small round table that she had almost seen in a museum before. On the table was a large silver cover, its appearance resembling a dome. It seemed to contain some food. Hunger overwhelmed Alice, and she, raising the cover, started to eat some unfamiliar but delicious dish. Thoughts of being poisoned right now somehow wouldn't leave her mind, but she pushed them aside. After taking a bath, Alice changed into a silk nightgown that had been thoughtfully prepared by someone and blissfully fell asleep. The next morning, the same servant from yesterday came for her and escorted her to another wing of the building. The girl obediently followed him. The man led her to a magnificent and very large dining room. She sat at the long table, and two well-trained footmen began to serve her immediately, gallant, graceful, and she once again felt as if she had either gone mad or ended up in the past. The luxurious sparkling chandelier glistened under the high ceiling. The elaborate napkins were made from a fabric that Alice had never touched before in real life. The entire interior resembled something artificial, ripped out of decorations from medieval Europe. Alice tried to maintain her composure, ate breakfast carefully, and in the moment when she elegantly wiped her mouth with a soft, beautiful napkin, Mr. Carter entered the dining room. Alice, forgetting where she was, jumped to her feet. "Dad. Dad, what's happening? Why all of this? I want to go home." The man smiled in response. "Get used to it, my dear. This is your life now, and it's rightfully accessible to you. Let's go. You have an important meeting." Internally, the girl almost howled. What meeting? With whom? What's going on here at all? Will someone finally tell her? But once again, she agreed not to ask unnecessary questions, and instead, she simply trusted her beloved father. Mr. Carter led the girl into a vast hall. In there, an elderly elegant lady was already sitting on a luxurious couch, along with a middle-aged man. Understanding nothing, Alice followed her father's instructions and sat down hesitantly opposite the strangers. Mr. Carter modestly stood aside. The man stood up. He was dressed in a luxurious dark blue pinstriped suit, his small eyes almost hidden behind thick horn-rimmed glasses. Clearing his throat, he began to speak. "Allow me to introduce myself, miss. I am Monsieur Falk, a lawyer. This is my client, Madame Sophie Alif." Following the lawyer, the elderly woman also stood up. She wore thin, black, long gloves on her hands. Her elegant black dress was perfectly matched with skillful makeup, and her high hairstyle of silver hair was a masterpiece of hairstyling art. She ceremoniously inclined her head and sat back down. Alice looked at her interlocutors in bewilderment. Then she turned to her father, and he nodded confidently at her. She opened her mouth and began to speak hesitantly. "Good day. I'm Alice Bishop. I'm from." "That's enough." The elderly woman smiled and raised her hand, interrupting the girl. "Dear, that's all unnecessary. If all our conclusions are correct, then I know you better than you know yourself. So, listen to me." And the woman began her story in good English. She told Alice that she was, until recently, the wife of a noble and very wealthy count, and the estate where the girl was now located belonged to him. She mentioned that she was the second wife of the late count. It turned out that the aristocrat in question had 2 sons. The younger one grew up to be a spendthrift and, as he didn't inherit the title or the family fortune, he spent his life extravagantly and carelessly. Eventually, he got involved with the mafia and died somewhere in Sicily. The older one, on the contrary, followed the right path. He got married, and soon after the wedding, his wife felt that the distinguished lineage would continue soon, but unfortunately, the young woman died in childbirth. Soon, her husband, the main heir of the ancient lineage, also died under mysterious circumstances. A lengthy investigation helped uncover the murderer. It turned out to be none other than the illegitimate son of the deceased younger brother, who died in Sicily. Alice listened to all of this, her mouth slightly agape in astonishment. It seemed to her that the elderly woman was narrating the plot of some well-known thriller. When the woman paused, Alice allowed herself to ask a clarifying question. "So, you're saying that the nephew killed his own uncle, and all of this?" "Correct, for the title, for the money," the woman nodded and continued her story. "Only that murderer miscalculated. He thought that the daughter of the main heir had also died along with her mother during childbirth, but that's not the case. The girl survived. After killing his own uncle, he disappeared for a while and now, in full confidence that he is the sole heir of the ancient lineage, he intends to claim the title. But he has miscalculated greatly. After the cruel murder of her father, his daughter was securely hidden in a distant country, the birthplace of our lineage. Her guardian took full custody of the little girl. He changed her name and took her far away to this other country. All of this happened 21 years ago. And now, it's time for this grown-up girl to learn the truth about her origins. To learn and take her inheritance into her own hands, the lady concluded solemnly. Alice glanced at her father, then looked back at Madame Sophie. "Your family has a very interesting history, and your narrative deserves great praise. But why did you tell me all of this?" The elderly lady smiled indulgently. Her tone carried a hint of condescension. "Alice, my dear girl. How old are you?" Alice, barely managing to control her internal trembling, responded uncertainly. 21 years old. "And why?" "Because, my dear, you are indeed that very girl, Alice. The heiress of the noble lineage, taken to America by a guardian many years ago. 21 years ago, your father, dying from poison, ordered his loyal servant to hide you far away, to take you to America. After all, it's from there that your famous lineage originates." The lady gestured towards Mr. Carter. He respectfully nodded in response. "We had to hide you from a dangerous relative. Hide you where he would never find you. Now that you've reached an age where you can claim your inheritance, and your grandfather, to my greatest regret, has passed away, we must restore justice and return to you what you rightfully deserve based on your birth." Alice, somewhat embarrassed, asked. "Is all of this really true? And this very nephew of my father's, did he poison him?" She glanced at Mr. Carter, and he weakly smiled at her, nodding his head. With just a look, the elderly man let his adopted daughter understand that she had understood everything correctly. "What if he finds me now?" Alice continued. Sophie replied. "You've understood everything correctly. My dear. Our task now is to confirm your relation to my late husband. To establish your right to inheritance and to protect you from Lorenzo." "Lorenzo? So, he's my uncle?" The girl clarified. "And I have to hide from him and at the same time claim the inheritance?" "That's right, dear girl." But, Sophie once again looked Alice up and down. "I must perform a genetic analysis. I cannot be entirely sure that you are indeed the granddaughter of my late husband. Although the family resemblance is undeniable. At this point, the voice came from Mr. Carter, who had been standing behind all this time. He hesitantly cleared his throat and took a few steps closer. Tell me, Madam Sophie. Do you remember that ancient prophecy? Your husband must have told you about it? The elderly lady waved her hands in frustration. Believe me, I know much more about it than you do, she blushed slightly, recovering from her excessive emotionality, and continued. You're talking about that legend that says the lost treasures will find their owner and heir by themselves? Yes, madam. I am indeed talking about that. But it's likely that it's not just a legend. Allow me to excuse myself briefly. The elderly man waited for an approving nod and briskly left the spacious hall. He returned after several long minutes, carrying a large suitcase in his hands. The very same suitcase that Mr. Carter had been sitting on when Alice returned from the wedding. Dad. Alice corrected herself. I mean. Alice was in complete confusion. She suddenly realized that she didn't really know the man who had raised her. What's this? The girl asked, suppressing the tremor in her voice. My dear. You know what this is. After all, you found it. Madam. Look here. Please. The elderly woman rose from her seat, genuine interest gleaming in her eyes. She leaned over the suitcase in complete silence, and only the sound of the zipper being opened by Mr. Carter broke the stillness, echoing unpleasantly under the high vaults of the ancient castle. Seeing the contents, Sophie clutched her chest. Take it out, she said in a low voice. Gerald calmly pulled an old chest out of the suitcase. The same chest that young Alice and her friends had discovered many years ago in the family crypt. The girl found it in her early childhood. Even when she was very young, she, along with her friends, managed to find the lost treasure. The elderly man proudly raised his chin. Of course, these are not entirely formal proofs, and yet, he nervously adjusted the edge of his collar. As you put it, madam, the legend seems to have become reality. Madam Sophie, perplexed by the found treasure, ran her hand along the massive chain. She looked at her lawyer, who understood her without words, and spoke up. All of this is very impressive, but we still cannot take your word for it. I am obligated to conduct tests on Alice, both genetic and gemological. Sophie Olive smiled at the girl. That's all for today. You may go to your chambers, she slyly squinted and addressed the girl. What's your name, as you say? Alice Bishop. The woman laughed. My dear, although the tests have not yet been conducted, and I cannot say with certainty that it's you, I will allow myself to name you after that lost girl. Alice looked intently into the woman's eyes. She held her breath. It felt like she was about to learn something significant. Agneta Alifta Jancourt, born Countess of Alishevskaya Jancourt. That was our family name. Long ago in the now abandoned America, the woman pronounced the name with feigned pride. She paused for a long moment. Now, you may go. Later that evening, the girl sat on a small balcony that led directly from her new chambers. The chirping of cicadas could be heard from below, and the intoxicating scent of fresh flowers filled the air. She gazed at the garden, an incredible view unfolding before her. She looked up at the clear sky studded with thousands of stars. Who am I? The young girl asked herself. Alice? Agneta? The heiress of the county, or just a waitress? She didn't even know to whom she was posing these questions. Perhaps to the infinitely darkening sky, or perhaps to herself. The recent events had left her head spinning, her thoughts in a whirl. Her life had changed as much as the life of a caterpillar does when it fulfills its true destiny of becoming a beautiful butterfly. Alice stepped back from the balcony and slowly settled on the edge of the bed. Tomorrow, the results of the tests were expected to arrive. Despite her anxiety, Alice fell asleep immediately as her head touched the pillow. It felt like only a few minutes had passed when a knock sounded at the door. Bright sunlight streamed through the open windows. Putting on a silk robe, Alice opened the door. At the threshold stood the elderly man she had always considered her father. Without saying a word, Alice swung the door wide, allowing him to enter the room, and sat back on the bed. My dear, the results are ready. Madame Sophie and her lawyer are already waiting for us. Get ready quickly. He entered the room and sat down on the couch. Silence fell, and the man repeated his question with a questioning tone. My dear. Who are you? The girl asked, staring at the ceiling. And who am I? What's my name? She asked these questions dryly, without emotion. Are you really not my father? Then who are you? Am I completely alone in this world? You're my daughter, Alice. Gerald answered affectionately. Although I'm not your biological father, I'll always consider you my child. He stood up and sat next to the girl. Did you know my biological father? She inquired. What was he like? Of course. He was a wonderful person and a generous master, decent, fair. Despite being my boss, we both knew that our connection went beyond work. We were true friends. The somber, elderly man fell silent briefly. It seemed he was trying not to cry. I worked for him as a manager for many years. He died right in my arms. As he was dying, he entrusted me with the most precious thing he had. You. I promised him that I would raise his daughter as if she were my own. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Whoever you are, my dear. No matter what name you go by. You will always be my beloved little girl. The girl turned to her father, tears welling up in her eyes. She got up from the bed, walked over to him, and embraced him tightly around the neck. Daddy, my dear. All right, all right. He comforted her sorrow, patting her shoulders. And now, get ready. It's not nice to make everyone wait, he added with a slight reprimand. And what's your real name? The girl asked this question as she stood in the bathroom doorway. The man smiled broadly. My name is Mark. Mark Steiner, but I would like to remain just Dad for you. The girl smiled back at him and disappeared into the bathroom. The lawyer nervously adjusted his tie. It seemed like it was tied too tightly. He took a stack of papers from his briefcase and proudly presented them to the people gathered in the hall. So, the analysis is ready. Congratulations, Miss Agneta. You are the true heir to all the estate. The girl was left speechless. Agneta? Agneta Alif de Jancourt? She repeated that name over and over to herself. Her own true name. The lawyer continued. Now let's move on to the results of the jewelry analysis. The lawyer took another sheet and quickly scanned its contents. The results confirmed that the items provided by Mark are genuine. All the contents of the chest belong to the Alif de Jancourt family. Madame Sophie gasped and placed her hand on her forehead. Finally. The woman exclaimed. The prophecy has come true. She approached the girl, opening her arms for an embrace. My dear, you are my husband's granddaughter, and therefore, my granddaughter too. Slightly embarrassed by this family scene, the lawyer continued his speech. I've prepared all the necessary documents for the inheritance. There are just a couple more. The man didn't finish as the door to the hall swung open, and a burly man in black uniform entered. A holster hung from his belt, and he held a walkie-talkie in his hands. He nodded to the elderly lady, and she quickly went in his direction. He whispered something in her ear. Judging by the Countess's expression, the information wasn't particularly pleasant. When the man left the room, Madame Sophie opened her trembling lips to say something. Her voice sounded frightened and serious. We urgently need to transfer all the property to Agneta. Lorenzo has just landed in Geneva. Her words reverberated throughout the large hall. The newly established estate owner sat in the drawing room. It had been a little over 2 weeks since she had been recognized as the true heir to the title. In this time, so many events had unfolded that her emotional range could hardly cope with it all. When the documents were finally processed, Alice nearly floated with happiness. I'm a real countess. My life is perfect. She exclaimed, trying on expensive jewelry. Deep inside her, the little girl who had been bullied by classmates as Alice and who had dreamed of status, title, and wealth awoke. She rejoiced, went to luxury stores and restaurants, met worthy and interesting people. However, unfortunately, her happiness did not last long. One day, she learned that her adoptive father, Mark, had been seriously injured. She wanted to rush to the hospital to see him, but she was not allowed to. The estate security had received clear instructions. The heiress was not to leave the house, and the security diligently carried out their task. She tried to convince them, but all her efforts were in vain. She had to wait patiently until the elderly man was discharged from the hospital and could come to see his daughter and finally embrace her. It turned out that Lorenzo, Alice's criminal uncle, had gone wild like a savage beast. Upon learning that Agneta Alif de Jancourt was alive, he, along with other thugs, waited for the right moment, and they captured the elderly man, threatening him that his adopted daughter would not live if she didn't renounce her inheritance. In the same alley where the vile relative had caught Mark, he suffered a stroke. Madame Sophie, shocked by what was happening, urgently turned to the police, through her lawyer, of course. The local police station simply shrugged their shoulders. There is no evidence of Mr. Lorenzo's involvement in the crime, law enforcement said. The stroke suffered by Mark did not convince them of the criminal intentions of the distant relative. The family had no evidence, threats, or links to Lorenzo in relation to the death of his uncle. Lorenzo turned out to be a true scoundrel. The rumors that he was somehow connected to the mafia seemed to be more than just rumors. Catching him and holding him accountable proved impossible. Either he had connections in the police, or he was exceptionally good at hiding. At a family meeting, a decision was made: the heiress should not be harmed. A dozen guards were assigned to the young woman, but even they couldn't always contend with the mafia servants of Lorenzo. After the unsuccessful attempt on Agneta's life, the young woman was strictly forbidden to leave the estate. Fate had presented Agneta Alice with a lesson now that her dream of title and royal life had come true. She realized that wealth without freedom was the true hell on earth. Life in a golden cage became unbearable for her. Mark, the girl's father, began to visit less frequently. He feared that someone could infiltrate the young countess's quarters along with him. All the leisure activities that had brought the girl so much happiness and fun in the beginning now bored her. Time dragged on slowly, like thick syrup. Each day became wetter, duller, and more dreadful. Days shifted into nights, and those melted into another set of days. Thus, it continued, seemingly endless. At some point, the girl even stopped distinguishing between night and day, Monday or Friday. She indulged in activities around the castle, trading one distraction for another, but with every passing second, her life faded, losing its former charm. It was late at night. Alice was contemplatively going through her jewelry box. Lately, she had taken to admiring the exquisite craftsmanship of her jewels. She pulled out one piece, then another, and another. Until she stumbled upon a pendant that she had completely forgotten until now. She slowly retrieved the small golden skull pendant, turned it in her hands, examined it, and approached the mirror. With a swift movement, she put on the accessory. Immediately, an image of Justin emerged in her mind. Justin, the brave and handsome little boy. She smiled and stepped out onto the balcony. Her wild imagination teased her with memories of a happy childhood. She gazed at the bright and full moon for a long time and, of course, remembered that kiss. Without much thought, she returned to her room to find her phone. She took it in her hands, located the contact she needed, and quickly typed a simple, non-committal message. "Hello. How are you? It's me, Alice." After sending the message, she tossed her phone aside and started to ponder. Whatever. I have nothing better to do anyway. Maybe I'll have some fun for once? Alice looked at herself in the mirror once again, hurried downstairs, and went in search of food. Suddenly, she was ravenously hungry. After eating, Alice continued to engage in her empty and uninteresting activities throughout the rest of the evening. As she was getting ready for bed, she remembered the message she had sent not too long ago. Taking her phone in her hands, she discovered 3 messages from Justin. Alice read the first one. Hey. I still have your number. Thanks for texting. Where are you? She smiled widely and opened the second and third messages. I need to apologize to you for that kiss. I didn't tell you that I'm already married. You had the right to know. Forgive me. Alice. Please reply. She burst into laughter. A long time ago, when she was still a little girl, her friend Deborah had casually said, upon noticing that Alice liked Justin. Alice, don't even bother with Justin. He's not on your level. His parents are businessmen, just like mine. And who's your dad? Don't even make me laugh. She had remembered those cruel words from her friend well. And now that Alice had discovered her true name and family position, Justin was no longer a match for her. She chuckled and started typing a response to her old friend. And so, the young people began an active dialogue. They texted during the day, exchanged messages in the evening, and shared silly emojis under the cover of night. Alice didn't let go of her phone for a second. One day, the old housekeeper, who had served the estate her whole life, noticed Alice's foolish smile directed at her phone screen and playfully remarked, "Has our young mademoiselle fallen in love?" Alice just waved her hand, giggling. Their correspondence covered everything and anything under the sun. Everything except their own feelings. The young countess didn't delve into the details of her new status. Firstly, it was strictly forbidden by the stern Madame Sophie. Revealing the secrets of her lineage was dangerous. Secondly, Alice herself had no desire to delve into her now lifeless, albeit undoubtedly rich and luxurious, existence. Justin, much like his conversation partner, hardly mentioned anything about his family. He sporadically sent messages with brief statements like "I'm at work" or "heading home." Despite her best efforts, Alice couldn't erase the memory of that kiss. She cherished the memory of it much like old folks fondly remember their youthful days. Alice often wondered, maybe they had already divorced? Oh, how much she wished for that. One day, Justin proposed to meet. Alice. How about I come to you? It's been so long since we've seen each other. I miss you, the young man wrote. Alice promptly declined, briefly mentioning that she had left the country a long time ago. On a warm, vivid summer evening, the young Countess Elif de Jancourt sat deep within the garden, in a charming, ivy-covered old gazebo. Guards stood in the distance. She couldn't leave the estate without their accompaniment. One of them, a young man named Ivo, stood nearby. Alice had befriended him. She didn't object to his company, but rather welcomed it. Alice clutched her phone tightly. Opening the chat, she hypnotically stared at the annoyingly blinking vertical line. She couldn't bring herself to ask the question that had been bothering her. Ivo, who stood behind her, spoke up. "Mademoiselle, is everything all right? You seem tense." "Yes, I just can't bring myself to ask an important question for me," Alice replied. "Is the person you're planning to ask it too important to you?" Alice pondered. She herself didn't quite understand what she felt for Justin. Were they purely friendly relations built on an old friendship, or was there something more? The wedding kiss once again ignited brightly in her thoughts. She answered softly. "Yes, I think I love him." The guard warmly smiled. Then asked boldly. "Otherwise, you might regret it later." Alice nodded gratefully. This advice was exactly what she needed. With determination, she typed a message. "By the way, how are things with Deborah? How's your family life?" And waited for a response, nervously twiddling the freshly picked flower in her hands. Standing beside her, Ivo instilled confidence. She privately noted once again that this guard was leagues better than the rest. Her phone vibrated. Justin had replied. Alice read the response and froze in place. "Well, how do I put it? We're living. Deborah is pregnant now," Justin replied. In that moment, it felt like the young countess's heart stopped. She hadn't realized how much she loved her old friend until now. Marriage was one thing, but a child, that was a whole different story. she reluctantly replied. "Congratulations." And put away her phone, slowly heading towards the house. Guards surrounded her and escorted her to the doors. The fact that Justin would soon become a father completely crushed her. If at some point she had felt like living again, that feeling had evaporated, just like a vivid dream fades immediately upon waking. Of course, she continued to live, but without the former sparkle in her eyes. However, her correspondence with Justin continued. A bit later, she learned that their family life wasn't as rosy as one might have thought. Justin mentioned that he and Deborah were too different. Their marriage wasn't as harmonious as it seemed, and they had only married because their parents insisted. They shared a family business. Justin's married life was unbearable. Deborah irritated him more and more, but he couldn't divorce her. The imminent birth of their heir bound him, tying him with thick threads around his arms and legs. Moreover, the parents of the young couple would definitely disapprove of a divorce. Over time, their correspondence dwindled completely. However, just a bit earlier, they had confessed their love for each other. Yet, even that admission changed nothing. Justin couldn't get divorced, and the young countess couldn't leave the family estate. The young couple accepted their powerlessness against the circumstances. Alice absent-mindedly stroked the horse. The brown and white mare neighed contentedly and nudged her shoulder with a wet nose. Alice couldn't help but laugh. Lately, she had taken an interest in horseback rides. Fortunately, the estate had plenty of space for that. Today, Alice once again visited the stable, with the faithful guard standing nearby, as always. "Evo," the girl said. "You know, my family used to own not just this estate, but an entire county?" "That's correct, mademoiselle. The surrounding lands also belong to you." "Oh, if only I could lay eyes on them. Even if just for a moment." The young man's eyes widened. He straightened up. "No, that's forbidden. Mademoiselle, you're not allowed to leave the estate. Moreover, you've been there before, when you could still leave the premises." "I was, but I didn't have time to enjoy them, to understand their beauty," emotionally replied the girl. "Evo." Her eyes sparkled, and she switched to a tender whisper. "Maybe you could somehow free me? Just for an hour, please. You'll be with me, and nothing will happen. Lorenzo has been gone for a long time. I'm sure of it. Please, take me out of here for a little while." "No one will know." She approached the guard, placed her hand on his shoulder, and with childlike sincerity looked into his eyes. "Please." Evo hesitated. He nervously glanced around and adjusted the holster with his pistol hanging on his belt. "Oh, well. But only for an hour, no longer, and you'll be with me all the time." "Hooray." She hugged him, hanging onto his neck. "Thank you. Thank you." The next morning, the girl lazily toyed with her fork on the plate. Evo had promised her that he would distract the other guards somehow and would soon come for her. She had no appetite, and the young countess eagerly awaited the moment when she would leave the walls of her castle and finally take a deep breath. Just then, Evo peeked out from behind the wide doors. "Evo." Alice jumped in place and happily ran towards him. The man put his finger to his lips and gestured towards the door. "Hurry. We only have half an hour." Slipping past the guard's station, the countess managed to leave the room along with her guard. She dashed ahead, arms outstretched, welcoming the warm breeze. She hadn't ventured beyond the solid walls for many long months, and this moment intoxicated her, filling Alice with newfound strength. Running behind her, Evo shouted, "Stop. Stay within my sight." Laughing, the girl turned around. "Relax. Everything's fine. Look, I'm here." Before she could finish her sentence, something pierced her neck like a wasp's sting. She momentarily stopped, her hands reaching for the painful spot, and then she lost consciousness. Alice woke up in a spacious white room. It felt like she was in a hospital. She slowly opened her eyes and scanned the room. Her throat was dry, her thoughts were muddled, and her body felt sluggish and unresponsive. In a hoarse voice, she asked, Where am I? As if emerging from the darkness, a silhouette approached her. For a moment, she felt a pang of fear. Lorenzo. She thought. Here comes my death. Fortunately, her fears didn't come true. As the silhouette drew closer, she managed to recognize Madame Sophie. Agneta. Her voice sounded rough and even threatening. What do you think you're doing? You're not allowed to leave the estate. Have you lost your mind completely? The elderly lady scolded. Where am I, madam? The girl repeated her question. Where? Of course, within the estate. In the office of our family doctor. Disappointed, the girl closed her eyes. She snorted to herself. Of course, there's even a doctor here. For a split second, she regretted finding herself within the estate again. What's wrong with me? Alice asked. They tried to poison you. Madame Sophie flared up in indignation. Did you think you were just prohibited from leaving the estate for no reason? One of Lorenzo's thugs followed you as soon as you left, and he shot a poison dart right into your neck. You were barely saved. The girl's hand instinctively reached for the spot where the dart had entered. Her hands trembled, her voice quivered. She realized she truly could have died. Where? Where is Ivo?
Ha!
The woman snorted. Of course, he's fired, and believe me, after this, he won't find another job. Imagine letting the person he vowed to protect be taken outside. He deserves to be punished, really. No. Alice couldn't hold back anymore, tears welled up. Please don't fire him. It's entirely and solely my fault. Madame Sophie waved her hand irritably, as if indicating that the conversation was over. Absolutely not. Sophie said. That's enough from me. By the way, keep in mind that you're now forbidden from leaving the estate too. You won't be leaving the house for any reason from now on. Now rest. The woman left the room, closing the door loudly. Indifferent time flowed by. Alice had fully transformed into a recluse, she couldn't leave the house. Like a long-forgotten specter, she roamed her castle, so big, yet so tiresome. Depression completely enveloped her. It seemed as if her black, slippery tendrils reached deep into Alice's soul, scrutinizing every corner. The meaning of life had been lost. The young countess merely existed, having forgotten her past dreams and plans. On one winter evening, Alice lazily sprawled in front of a large television, resembling more of an anonymous shadow than a young and wealthy girl. Alice was watching some movie, which she herself didn't quite understand. Her mind was empty. Not long ago, she received an unexpected message from Justin on her phone. He wrote that he was soon going on a trip to Nice for some business meeting. He mentioned that Deborah would be with him. But he still insisted that she come too. The young countess ignored the message. She understood perfectly well that she couldn't leave the country, let alone the house. Something on the screen caught her eye, reminding her of a distant and forgotten past. Vanessa. Alice cried out. The zombie movie she watched reminded her of the birthday when her older friend Vanessa had put on zombie makeup. Immediately, Alice recalled how Vanessa had taught her the art of makeup. Vanessa had taught the young girl how to apply makeup correctly and how to disguise herself so that no one would ever recognize her. This memory filled her with hope, and a plan quickly formed in her mind. Alice sat in the dark corner of her bedroom, shrouded in darkness. Recognizing Alice was impossible. After thorough preparation, she disguised herself as a young man. Short strands of hair fell onto her face. A carefully sculpted nose was hidden under a layer of thick modeling clay, transforming into a crooked, large nose. The wide, fake chin looked somewhat caricatured. Alice sent a clarifying message. Is everything ready? A short reply came after a couple of seconds. Yes. Let's begin. Suppressing her emotions, the girl slowly walked to the window. A new life awaited her. A grand plan had matured slightly earlier. She realized that such a life no longer suited her and decided to escape. Having withdrawn a substantial sum of money, the girl, after changing her appearance, also changed her documents. A loyal friend, the dismissed guard Ivo, helped her with that. Despite his strong opposition, he cared for the life of the former mistress, unable to refuse her either. He prepared fake documents for her and bought a one-way ticket to Nice. Somehow, he managed to distract the guard's attention and gave the girl a head start to escape. And now, with a face changed beyond recognition into that of a young man, her chest painfully squeezed by a corset, and padded shoulders, she was carefully climbing out of the second-floor window using a sturdy rope. Finally, when her feet touched the ground, she let out a relieved breath. She had managed to leave the estate. Alice, hardly believing her luck, jumped into the inconspicuous car that was prepared in advance, and Ivo was at the wheel. As they set off, he asked, "Are you sure, mademoiselle?" "More than ever," Alice replied. She chuckled, seeing how her new male appearance was making Ivo uncomfortable. "I agreed to this only because a new life can keep you safe. Know that I'm always ready to help. Promise you'll be careful." Agneta looked at the man seriously. His sharp green eyes confirmed that he wasn't lying. She thought about how lucky she was to have met such a faithful and devoted friend. "I promise," the girl said seriously. The car stopped at the airport. Agneta, hugging Ivo tightly, confidently walked inside. Her heart raced. Finally, something will change, the girl thought to herself. Soon, she boarded the plane without any problems, and now Alice was leisurely sprawled in a soft seat. In her hand was a bright red-orange cocktail, and the open veranda of the restaurant, where she was sitting, offered a stunning view of the waterfront. Her face was sweaty under the thick layer of makeup. The corset painfully squeezed her chest. Next to her, on the adjacent seat, sat a young girl who flirtatiously smiled at Alice and murmured something in Italian. The young countess casually waved her off. She couldn't have imagined that her male appearance would be so attractive to other women. She had chosen one of the most expensive resorts in Nice, where her new appearance posed no problems at all. She lazily sipped her cocktail and enjoyed the views. Her new life had shaped up incredibly well. The girl kept thinking about how wonderfully she had planned everything. She smirked, gazing at the horizon. Finally, freedom was within her reach. The indulgent life brought her immense pleasure, and her past life seemed to have completely released her. No one was looking for the young countess, or at least that's how it seemed to her. In the distance, a commotion arose. Alice heard English being spoken, a language she hadn't heard in a long time. She turned sharply, trying to find the source of the noise, but then her face flushed, and she stared captivated at the open doors of the veranda. Justin was standing there. Alice wanted to jump up, run, wipe off the tiresome makeup, and throw herself into his arms. But, of course, she continued to sit, trying to appear disinterested. Alice caught only fragments of phrases. It seemed Justin was arranging a meeting. Another familiar face appeared. It was Deborah, happy and beautiful. She clung to Justin's arm, and he reluctantly stood next to his wife. She laughed loudly, smiled at someone, and practically glowed with happiness. The exuberant noise from her former friend made Alice shudder. Led by some strange feeling, she moved towards her old acquaintances. All eyes were fixed on her. She walked with masculine determination, her hands clasped behind her back. Seeing Alice in her male disguise, Deborah smirked and immediately lowered her hand from her husband's arm. The countess snickered and greeted them. "Good evening. How nice to hear our native language," she said in a deep voice. Justin opened his mouth to greet, but Deborah interrupted him. "Good. I didn't know our fellow countrymen were here." She casually touched Alice's arm. The countess pulled her hand away and continued the introduction, exchanging a few polite phrases before asking. "It seems you're involved in construction, Justin?" "Yes," Justin replied. "I didn't know people were already talking about me here." He hesitated slightly. "I apologize. I need to go. An important meeting. I'm staying in room 101. Come by for a drink, Leroy, when you're comfortable." With a nod, he turned and left. Bewildered, Alice watched him go, momentarily forgetting that Deborah was still standing there. Deborah lightly nudged the interesting man's elbow. "And you? Are you alone here?" She smiled softly and adjusted her neckline, causing her dress to lower. Alice shifted her gaze to her former friend and thought to herself. "Is she trying to get close to me?" She replied aloud. "Yes, I'm alone." "And what about you, dear?" Deborah burst into a ringing laughter. "Consider me alone too." She playfully winked. "Keep in mind, I wouldn't mind spending time in the company of such a handsome young man." Glad to make your acquaintance, with a sway of her hips, she left the veranda. Alice returned to her table and placed another order. Was she hinting at a date? "She's married to Justin." The girl continued to think to herself. Alice ran her finger along the cold, wet glass, and a plan of revenge began to take shape in her mind. The next evening, the Countess began to put her plan into action. Disguised as the same young man, she found Deborah lying by the pool in the morning. Turning on her charm and embracing her newfound masculinity, she invited her to a rendezvous in her room. Deborah didn't hesitate and eagerly agreed. Angered on behalf of her friend, Alice invited Justin to an exclusively male party under the same guise. She quickly fabricated a story about a successful deal to justify the meeting. Thus, Alice invited the couple almost at the same time and to the same place, with Deborah scheduled to arrive slightly earlier. As the clock struck the designated time for the rendezvous, the Countess stood in front of a large mirror, adding the finishing touches to her disguise. A quiet knock echoed at the door. Nervous, she went to answer it. There stood Deborah, wearing a short, bright yellow, figure-hugging dress. Her lips were unevenly painted with red lipstick. How tasteless, the Countess noted to herself. Deborah entered the room, her heels tapping on the floor. She sat on the bed and playfully crossed one leg over the other. Alice felt flustered. Suddenly, she realized she didn't know how to behave in such a situation. She stood up, then settled on the edge of a coffee table. Deborah finally spoke. "So," she shrugged her rounded shoulders. "How are you planning to entertain a lady?" Alice furrowed her brow, cleared her throat, trying to come up with something to say. What would you like to do?" Here, Deborah stood up and slowly approached Alice. She traced her fake chin with her long nail, and the Countess recoiled in horror. "Don't be afraid, silly," Deborah whispered and leaned in, her lips approaching Alice's. Completely bewildered, Alice allowed the kiss to happen. She took control of Deborah's waist, realizing that Justin would arrive any moment. She didn't have to wait long. The previously left open door swung open, and Justin appeared in the doorway. Lost in passion, Deborah didn't notice her husband and continued to writhe in the embrace of the imaginary Leroy. Justin shouted. "Deborah! What the hell?" He rushed towards the couple, forcefully pushing her away from Alice. "You're cheating again?" He continued to shout. He stood close to Alice, his nostrils trembling with anger. "Why did you call me here? Did you want me to see how you're using my wife?" He raised his hand to strike, but an unforeseen event occurred. With a swift motion, Alice removed the wig and then all the other disguises. She took off the fake shoulders and wiped away the tiresome makeup, revealing her true face. Pale as death, Justin, still with his raised fist, took a couple of steps back and plopped down on the bed next to his wife. Deborah, astonished, clutched her cheeks. Justin slowly and quietly asked. "Alice." Agneta, to be precise, she proudly raised her chin. "But for you, my friends, I'm still Alice." "Deborah, you're such a bitch," Justin shifted his gaze to his wife. "You didn't know, did you? You didn't know it was her? Why did you come here for?" He wrinkled his nose in disgust. "Is our child at least mine?" Indignant, Deborah blushed and yelled angrily. "No, not yours. Don't even hope for it. Screw you, and you can follow her." She sprang to her feet and hastily left the room. Justin shouted after her. "I'm filing for divorce." and then burst into laughter. I've had enough of all this. I'm not putting up with her anymore. He took out his phone and quickly typed something, then turned to Alice and ruffled his hair. Alice. Consider me free now. He smiled widely and took her hand. She smiled in return. Consider me too. He gently adjusted a strand of her short hair, wiped off the remaining bits of makeup from her face, and approached. Alice, do you want to be mine? Right now? Alice averted her gaze. Her heart raced with renewed intensity. She reached for Justin, offering him her kiss. The young couple embraced, forgetting about everything else in the world. After so many years and overcoming so many obstacles, they were finally together. Later, Alice told Justin about everything that had happened to her in the last few years. The young countess didn't hide any shocking details of her life from her beloved. They pondered for a long time on how to proceed. Going back to America was too dangerous. Returning to Switzerland was even more so. Alice waited for Justin to finish his business and finalize his divorce. She waited while trying to come up with a new plan. Finally, when Justin settled his affairs for good, the young couple reunited, now forever. They decided it was best to go far away to a different continent. They chose Spain. Taking all their money with them, they headed to Galicia on the shores of a vast ocean and bay. They purchased a small house to avoid drawing too much attention and began to live happily. For several months, they lived their lives, enjoying each other's company. They had fun, spent money, and lived life to the fullest. At some point, a completely relaxed Alice stopped hiding and disguising herself as a man. She started growing her hair, rekindled her love for makeup and interesting outfits. Meanwhile, Justin, although he lost a significant part of his business, started anew. He founded a small construction company and returned to his beloved work. Alice was completely happy, she even made new friends. She relaxed on the beach, sipping aromatic cocktails, attended exhibitions, and indulged in art. Together, they rode horses and engaged in sports. In short, Alice's life resembled a true fairy tale. Her beloved man was her best friend, and she had almost forgotten that someone had once tried to kill her. However, this happiness didn't last long. One warm evening, as the young countess hurried home from meeting her friends, she got into her convertible. She closed the door and picked up her phone to text her husband. Suddenly, she felt someone's gaze on her. She couldn't see the person who was watching her, but Alice knew for sure that someone was watching her. She felt it on her skin, like a sixth sense on a mental level. Cold sweat covered her back, and Alice slowly turned around. Behind her was a black car with tinted windows. Her hands trembled, and her phone slipped out of her hand. She remained frozen in place, unable to move. Her hand instinctively reached for her neck, to the same spot where the poison dart had once struck. Could it be my imagination? She thought to herself. She started the engine, lowering the car's roof, pulled onto the road, and with frustration realized that the car was following her. Damn it! Lorenzo! The Countess exclaimed. She realized that even oceans couldn't hide her from her past. Justin and Alice were sitting together in a spacious reception area. Famous reproductions adorned the light walls, and a large leather couch warmly embraced clients. Justin asked, "Are you sure? Isn't it worth trying the police first, at least?" "I'm sure." In confirmation, the girl nodded her head briefly. After the young heiress noticed she was being watched, she immediately informed her beloved. Justin immediately suggested going to the police. "The police work much better in Spain. We should report that they're in town. They'll put out an international warrant for them," Justin exclaimed, but Alice shook her head in disagreement. "They're already on an international warrant, dear," the girl replied. "The police won't help us. I know for sure." After their unpleasant experience at the police station in Geneva, the girl was convinced that Lorenzo had good connections with law enforcement agencies in any country. In the end, the young couple decided to seek the help of a private detective, and now they were sitting in the waiting room of a detective agency. A secretary in a neat classic pantsuit approached them. "They're ready to see you," she said with a smile. The young couple exchanged glances and entered the office. The private detective was their last hope. A few days later, the Countess scrutinized the girl who precisely replicated her appearance. She squinted, circled behind her, and touched the short hair. "Darling, what do you say? Does she look similar?" Alice turned to Justin. "Oh, yes," the young man exclaimed with admiration. "Identical. I would have been fooled myself." "Is that so?" The girl looked at her husband ironically and reproachfully. He glanced away in embarrassment, shaking his head, and continued the conversation in a serious tone. "It seems everything is ready. The actress has learned the role well. We can start the performance." Alice nodded confidently. "Yes. Let's begin." She opened the mirror and adjusted the applied makeup. A little earlier, a good and effective way to catch the criminal had been suggested to the young countess, commonly known as baiting. A burly red-haired man with a protruding belly and a smoking pipe, hired by them through the detective, had devised an interception plan. He proposed throwing a big open party that anyone could attend. Something related to charity. The plan was simple: lure the mobsters in. Make them believe they could blend into the crowd. Alice was supposed to be at the center of the event, portraying herself as an accessible and easy target. However, everyone understood that exposing the Countess herself would be incredibly dangerous. Therefore, they decided to hire an actress for her role. A suitable girl for the role was found quickly. She was trained and coached to look exactly like the heiress. "Don't you dare eat or drink anything," the detective repeated over and over again, exhaling a cloud of cigar smoke. Underneath the girl's attire, they had placed a bulletproof vest, and under the wig, a thin yet sturdy helmet. Finally, the last preparations for the party were completed. Musicians were hired, a charitable foundation was chosen, cameras were placed all around the perimeter, well hidden from prying eyes. Alice had returned to her usual makeup, the face and body of a young, fair-haired man. When the guests began to arrive, Alice, Justin, the detective, and a couple of guards gathered behind the curtains in a small room for the orchestra. In this room, monitors were set up, displaying everything captured by the cameras. They lay in wait. The party began. "I don't see anything suspicious," Justin exclaimed irritably. "We've been here for an entire hour, and those bastards are nowhere to be seen." "Don't jump to conclusions prematurely," the detective calmly said. In reality, the party had been going on for more than an hour already, and some guests, leaving their glasses behind, were even starting to leave the hall. Yet, not a single suspicious individual had been spotted. It seemed that all of their efforts were in vain. "Can I go out for a look?" Alice asked. "What if they realized I'm not there? If I step out, they might show up. They wouldn't actually try to kill me right in front of everyone, would they?" The young countess was getting quite tired of being confined. The heavy makeup made her uncomfortable, and her body ached. She had already left her hiding place a little earlier, but hadn't noticed anything suspicious. Out of frustration, Justin's veins popped out on his forehead. "Have you gone mad? Don't even think about it." He grabbed the girl's hand. "Of course, they won't try to strangle you right there, but what if they shoot you? Have you thought about that?" "They won't shoot." The detective intervened. The security at the entrance thoroughly checked the visitors, he furrowed his brows. "The only thing we intentionally didn't check was suspicious substances." He turned his gaze to the girl and continued gently, sympathetically. "We know that your father was poisoned, and someone already tried to poison you. Most likely, the criminal will follow a similar pattern. We must closely monitor the glasses of our guests." Alice looked down, embarrassed. She immediately thought of Mark. She hadn't seen him in so long. A lump formed in her throat. She even thought of her own father. The Countess often pondered what he had been like, what he loved, and what he was passionate about. In that moment, she despised Lorenzo more intensely than ever. The scoundrel ruined our entire lives. the heiress thought. Meanwhile, the number of guests was dwindling. Even the detective was ready to admit that the trap had failed, when suddenly. Look. Justin leaned towards one of the screens, pointing at someone. I think it's him. The others followed his lead, gathering around the monitors and intently staring at the suspicious figure. A dark-haired man, resembling an Italian, approached the actress portraying Countess Agneta with deliberate steps. He sat down at her table, saying something without wiping the luxurious smile off his face, and gestured towards the stage. The real Agneta's heart seemed to stop. She looked at the screen hopefully. The suspicious man continued sitting with the actress, frequently gesturing and pointing in various directions. It seems he's not making up his mind. The detective said thoughtfully. Okay. We need her to be a bit more distracted. He grabbed the radio in his hands and muttered something quietly into the microphone. The actress discreetly touched her ear, a small earpiece was hidden there. She gave a signal towards the nearest camera. It meant that she understood the received information and had relayed something to the man. He pointed somewhere in the opposite direction again, and the girl had to turn her chair. She followed his indication and purposely didn't return her gaze to her conversational partner for a while. At that moment, what everyone had been waiting for finally happened. The man, reaching into his pocket, took out a small vial and poured its contents directly into the girl's glass. Everyone in position. Get ready. The detective said over the radio. At the same time, the man, taking his glass, offered the actress to drink with him. He wanted to make sure the actress would consume her dose of poison. Deliberately pausing, the actress raised the poisoned glass in front of her, and right then, like a bright flash, what Alice had been waiting for over the past few years finally happened. Disguised police officers lunged at the poisoner, knocking him to the ground, guns pointed at him. Panic ensued, and regular guests, terrified to death, tried to flee the building. Alice smiled broadly. Quickly removing her makeup, she headed straight into the hall. She approached the man lying on the floor and asked the law enforcement to turn him over. Looking at her face, bewildered by what was happening, he seemed to have understood. The game was finally over. Several months passed from that day. The poisoner, named Francesco, proved to be a tough nut to crack. Initially, he refused to talk. He remained silent, not revealing his name or his sponsor's identity. He was even willing to take full responsibility. Alice, watching the interrogations, merely sneered in contempt. Such nobility. When she realized that Francesco had no intention of revealing the name she wanted, she decided to act more cunningly. She promised the poisoner a substantial sum of money and full immunity. She provided the promise in writing, and only then did he start talking. No one was surprised to learn that his patron was the illegitimate and distant cousin of the girl. That same Lorenzo, who had poisoned her father in the past. But when, under the pressure of interrogations, Francesco finally revealed the rest of his patron's crimes, even the most seasoned investigators were shocked. He provided all the necessary testimonies for the investigation. He even disclosed more than was required. The promised sum completely loosened the criminal's tongue. He not only exposed Lorenzo but also the other members of the mafia group. After a high-profile trial, all the mobsters received life sentences, leaving not only the Countess's family in peace, but also numerous innocent people. Finally, it was over. Countess Agneta Alif de Jancourt managed to return to her ancestral estate. She and Justin moved back to her family's nest. Justin continued his beloved work, and now a mature and wise Alice delved into politics, eager to feel useful to society. Mark, Alice's adoptive father, was now able to visit her much more frequently. Later on, he even moved into the estate. Fortunately, there was more than enough space there. After some time, Alice managed to find her childhood friend Vanessa and provide for her life. Vanessa and her family also relocated to Geneva. And, of course, Alice didn't forget about her loyal bodyguard, Ivo. As soon as she moved back, she reconnected with him and appointed him as the head of her security detail. Life in the family was now going well. One day, a few years later, Countess Agneta gathered all her loved ones in a spacious hall, waiting a bit for Ivo, who arrived slightly late. She walked to the center of the room and began her speech. "I've gathered all of you here for a reason." She confidently scanned her large family. "I have two important pieces of news for you." Madame Sophie shrugged her shoulders. "What's happening, Agneta?" Alice laughed. "Nothing, Sophie, everything's fine. First, I will be running for mayor." The people around nodded approvingly. Vanessa exclaimed with joy. "About time, dear." Madame Sophie snorted in dissatisfaction. She didn't fully comprehend why the servants were invited to a family gathering, but Alice ignored that and continued. "And second," she lowered her hand to her abdomen. "Very soon, our heir will come into the world." Justin, forgetting about etiquette, jumped up from the couch and rushed to his wife. "You're pregnant?" "Yes," Alice smiled broadly. She looked around once again. Mark, perpetually solemn, broke into a smile, and Madame Sophie discreetly wiped her eyes with a snowy handkerchief. The Countess closed her eyes, lost in the embrace of her beloved husband. All her close people were there, and she finally fully embraced her familial title. Being a countess is not just about parties and constant fun. It's not only expensive gowns and jewelry. It's also significant responsibility, the woman thought. Her life had finally become what she had always wanted.